Okay, well, welcome everyone. We're so happy to be with you this afternoon and so happy to talk to you about thriving in a student's journey to the University of Texas at Austin. A couple of housekeeping notes. We will be sharing both this presentation and the video recording of it afterwards tomorrow. And if you do have questions as we go, we'd love to answer them. And if you can utilize the Q&A here in Zoom, it helps us keep track of that. If the question is super specific to a student, we may not be able to tackle it at that level of depth, but we'll try to do everything we can to answer questions that folks might have. Lisa and I and Delora are so happy to be with you today. Lisa, would you like to say anything before we dive in about the company and our history with the University of Texas at Austin?
Well, I would just first say welcome. Thank you for spending your Sunday afternoon, an hour of it with us. This is a topic, as Bob said, that we really love because there's so many great things for students that actually help students ultimately thrive in college that are woven into preparing for potentially applying to the University of Texas at Austin. And so we think that there is a lot of good here that students can jump into and learn about. And I think we really love trying to make this process as transparent as possible for families so that you know ahead of time kind of what it takes to ultimately apply to the University of Texas. So today we're not talking about applying, but actually about how to prepare. So we're so glad you're here. Thank you. So one of the things about the University of Texas at Austin is that it is a holistic review. And you might wonder, what do we mean by the term holistic review? And what we mean by holistic review is that they're looking at all the parts of a student's application, and we'll go through that today. But first of all, the top 6%, if you go back one, Bob, thanks. Many people want to understand, what is the top 6%? Texas students in public high schools, there are ranked the top 6%, even if their school is not a ranking school overall. They do send that top 6%. Some private schools, most don't, but you would have to check with your specific school. The thing to understand about this is that it admits you into the university. However, it does not guarantee a specific major, and you still have to meet standards for a certain major or program. So the good news is it does guarantee you into the university, which is a huge, huge win, but it does not guarantee you into a major. Anything you want to add there, Bob?
No.
And then how does UT read an application? Obviously, this is true of all college admissions. So I know many of you on here have younger students, right? And all of college admissions, you can't run from your grades. That's the big enchilada in the middle. And there's no way to run from that. So your transcript is just a recording of your grades. Now, test scores right now are optional. UT specifically has never put a huge weighting on test scores. So even prior to the test optional world, we would see students who had strong grades, were a good match to their major at UT, had good leadership, and not as strong a test scores getting in. So that piece, whether they potentially at some point could go back to requiring scores, it's probably not going to be a huge part of the process. Now, one place where I think UT is specifically unique is in the way they look at the resume, and we will talk in depth about that today. It's really not a resume, and Bob will explain that when he talks about resume. Then there are the students' essays and the major a student chooses. I cannot stress this enough, and you'll probably be sick of hearing us say this by the end of this session, but the major choice, the first choice major, is probably the largest decision that a student makes on their UT application and has the biggest impact on their application. And we will kind of unfurl that as we go. I think demonstrated interest is nominally important at best at UT. I do think going and doing an official tour is always smart, and is any type of consumer, even though many people on here probably live in the area or it's not too far for them to get there. I think doing an official tour is a smart move.
Lisa, can you comment how, if at all, UT Austin's approach to holistic review may differ from other colleges and universities that utilize holistic?
Well, I think that what I would say is that for the size of the university, it is incredibly holistic. And what I mean is many parents will say to us, well, they don't really read those essays, and they don't really look at the resume. And yes, they actually really do look at all of it. And for any students families where they've already had a student apply to UT, you know that it is quite a process. It's one of the harder colleges to apply to in the country, just in terms of the volume of materials that you have to submit. So I would say it's a very in-depth process for a large state university, and it all does really matter.
And is that emphasis on major unique to the University of Texas at Austin, or are there other schools in the country that are similar in that way?
I would say that UT was sort of the first out the gate, one of the first out the gate to put so much emphasis on major. It's been about 8 years now, I think, that the focus on major has been so strong at UT. Now, so in the beginning, it felt like when they first started doing that a lot of other colleges weren't doing it. Now we're seeing that really across all colleges. But I would say UT still is on your major is a huge, huge part of it. So I think that has trickled down to other colleges, but I also think they're still kind of on the extreme end of it. Yeah. Which, to just
Right.
explain why that is because they're trying to manage, is a student well prepared and therefore will likely graduate in that major. That's sort of the tension they're trying to manage.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about what fit to major actually means at UT Austin. So, mechanically, when a student applies to the University of Texas at Austin, she's required to pick a first choice major. We always say to students, pick a first choice major that you're most excited about, that you want to spend 4 years learning about. There are some students who start this process trying to quote unquote think strategically about a major. And the hitch of that is be careful about being admitted to a major that you don't want to spend 4 years studying. The first choice major is really important to UT Austin. It is to some extent the first question that determines how they're going to read you. And it's also sort of the router to who's going to read you. The school that a student applies to, or the major that she applies to some extent determines who will be reading her application. Now, second choice major is predominantly for auto admit students. Lisa, can you talk for a couple of minutes about the role of second choice major for students?
Yes, I can. So really, for top 6% students, they have for students not in the top 6%, they put a first choice major and a second choice major. Now, when someone asks you to do that, you think they're considering both of those, right? That would be, but they're actually not. I think in my 15 years as a college consultant doing students at UT, I've only once seen a student get in her second choice major, and she was a 6.3% student. So we don't see students getting their second choice major unless they're in the top 6%. The top 6% students get a first choice, a second choice, and they added a third choice a few years ago. Those students are actually considered for all those majors. But the vast majority of the students, because we work with predominantly students who are not in the top 6%, are really, think of this like a dart. You're throwing one choice, and so you really do have to think about that, because it is a one and done kind of situation. So that's not a good decision to make on the day that one is filling out the application, for example. That's something one's going to want to think about, pretty heavily prior to applying.
Now, what exactly does fit to major mean? Well, once you've chosen that major, UT is evaluating your transcript, they're evaluating your resume, your essays. They're really trying to get a snapshot of how you fit to that major. In many ways, fit to major at UT Austin has been, and in a test optional world continues to be, more important than test scores. It is the rubric that a reader at UT Austin is trained, a human being, to review your resume, your essays, to look at your extracurriculars, your grades in your foundational subjects, how rigorous your class choices were, to really get a sense of how a student fits to mechanical engineering or business or nursing. And that fit to major doesn't just begin, as Lisa said, the day you apply to college. For the more competitive majors, it can be a 3-year project. It can represent a increasing amount of engagement and initiative. Computer science is a great example. UT Austin wants to admit experienced, talented software developers. They don't have enough spaces in computer science to admit students who are interested in computer science. They want students who are engaged and have been actively engaged in that major. Now, Lisa and I have both talked about competitive majors, what UT calls impacted majors. It's a math problem. There are substantially more applicants for these majors than they have classroom seats. Historically, these majors have included business. A reminder at UT Austin, they don't actually require you to articulate your specialization in business. This is different from engineering. So you apply unspecified business at UT Austin. All the majors in Cockrell Engineering, computer science, architecture, the School of Nursing is an especially competitive program. These majors are the competitive majors at UT Austin. And they're the majors where fit to major, even for an auto-admit student, can really make the difference in terms of whether or not that student is offered admissions to that major. Lisa, do you want to talk a little bit about the impacted majors and how you've seen them play a role in fit to major?
Well, I think that really it's pretty much just what you said. I think, we see some kind of blips up and down of other majors, but these are the ones that tend to be the most competitive. And I think, excuse me, when you're thinking about fit to major, you want to think about both your curricular things, so your classwork, how that fits, and your extracurriculars. And ideally, you need both. Okay. So you need things inside the classroom and outside the classroom. And I think, like Bob said, it is a math problem. And so it's also important to know what coursework they're going to be looking for these different majors, because and these are all decisions that have to be made prior to a student applying, which is why we like to have these conversations early, because there are a lot of decisions that one can make about curriculum, about what you're going to do in the summer, those kinds of things. They're going to have a pretty big impact, in addition to your grades, on whether you're admissible or not.
Now, each year we have 9th and 10th graders, even in the fall, juniors, who are trying to determine what their major is. There are a whole host of ways to do this. Some high schools offer classes related to potential tracks. what in the state of Texas are called endorsements, where a student might be able to take a class in the fundamentals of business or in something related to engineering. UT offers a phenomenal resource. We even refer students who aren't applying to UT Austin to this resource, Wayfinder. It is a fabulous way for a student to reflect on herself, to research majors, to even research the kind of careers that go with that major. As an example, at UT, there are so many majors in communications, and a student really gets a feel for all the different career fields and career stories that can go with a major in communications. It really fills in a sense of what a student will experience during her 4 years at UT in the classroom, but it also gives them a sense of what they can expect in terms of jobs and internships related to that. We found in our work with students that maybe the most impactful way to determine your major is informational interviews, job shadows. A student spending time in person or on a Zoom with a business professional who's majored in an area of study, so a student can get the experience of understanding what does that major and job entail? What was that person's own journey professionally? We have a consultant on our team who says, honestly, if there's one thing a student could do before junior year, it's learn how to do informational interviews and write thank you notes. And it's something I think, as we all know as adults, is a skill that you'll go back to over and over again in your professional life. It's how the majority of students find jobs and internships and careers. There are a whole host of other ways to determine your major, but we found these two tools particularly useful. Lisa, is there anything you want to add about Wayfinder and informational interviews?
No, I think you did a great job. Thanks.
Great. So we mentioned this before. Once a student starts being more specific about her journey to UT, there is this question of, are they UT or bust? Are they singularly focused on a experience for 4 years at the 40 acres, or are they major focused? A good example is majoring in biology versus majoring in health and society. Health and society is a fabulous major in the College of Global Arts that tends to be a little more focused on public health policy. Biology is clearly a natural science major. And as a student thinks through their major choice, many of them will weigh the pros and cons of a major compared to their singular focus on UT Austin. Now, there are 3 undeclared options. We want to make a note. Several years ago, UT Austin wrapped up a program they had called undergraduate studies. It was an overall undecided major. The student would enter that major for no more than 2 years, and at the end of that, working with an academic advisor and a major advisor, they would have transferred into a major that they feel excited about. UT wrapped up that. They don't have that program anymore. They do offer 3 undeclared options for students who know they're interested in a field of study, but they haven't yet determined the specific major. Now, UT each year and over several years have added really exciting, interesting majors. We've found in our work with students that there are a number of students who become excited about statistics and data science, a relatively recent major at UT Austin, and informatics. Statistics and data science can be great for a computer science student who might be interested in machine learning or AI. Informatics is great for a marketing or management student who wants to be a product manager. Sustainability studies are a fabulous major for a student who's interested in climate and all issues related to that. And so we always encourage students to look towards their interests And then to really dig into the majors that UT offers, there are some really unique, exciting majors that a student can research and find.
So let's talk a little bit about how one goes about activity planning for all of these different majors, because that's one of the key things that we're talking about here today. So, first of all, there's a lot of myths and facts out there about activity planning, that extracurriculars and academics don't overlap. You absolutely, when you get to your UT resume, can include both things that you do outside the classroom and academics. They can totally overlap. And sometimes schools have things that are really great that are like independent studies or things like that, which are academic and independent, and that can be great too. So you don't have to think of them as two separate buckets when you're thinking about your fit to major activities. Those things can overlap and often do. The other kind of myth out there about activity planning is that students should just go join a whole bunch of school clubs. That's the answer. Now, students should go join clubs if they're excited about them, because the point of high school isn't just preparing for college. The point of high school is to be engaged in your high school. So if there's any club at a school that a student's excited about, he or she should join it, because that could be a great experience for them. However, we get a lot of questions about preparing for college and concern that my student doesn't belong to a lot of clubs. Students need to have a robust set of activities that are going to show their fit to major, some leadership, and some service, right? Those can happen inside the classroom, inside your school, outside your school, at your temple, at your wherever, in your community center. Like, these things don't have to happen inside the school walls. And so school clubs can be great, or for some kids, it's not something they want to do. Maybe they're already involved in something else. Students have to have one passion. And it could sound like we're saying that when we talk about fit to major. For a school like UT, and we could sit here and debate this all day, whether it's good or bad, they're going to have to be successful, let me put it this way, they're going to need to have fit to major activities. However, that does not mean that's all they can have. Most of us have many interests, many passions, right? So they may be a star soccer player and be super interested in the environment. Keep going with the soccer and make sure that they get some activities on the environment as well. So it's not, you can't have both. Also, I will say UT loves leadership. So, take a leadership position on the team. That would be great. The last one, and definitely the biggest myth in college, the kind of college buzz out there in the community right now, is this: you've got to crank up a bazillion community service hours. And I really am amazed at how many community service hours some students can get. It's very impressive. But just to kind of understand what colleges are looking for when we're thinking about activity planning or engagement, they're looking to be able to see something that the student cares about and is passionate about. They're not looking for hundreds and hundreds of random hours where really cleaning up the trash after the school dance. It's a little bit hard for the college to know what the student is passionate about, right? And students are always excited about being clever with those hours. But ultimately, they're going to go in an application. Delara earlier today ran an application session. It's going to reduce to 10 slots on an application where they're going to actually have to explain what they did. So just remembering that the quality of service and its relationship to the person and why that's important to them is much more important than a big push for hours. Bob, anything you want to add?
Yeah, one thing, I think sometimes, particularly for families who have a history at UT Austin, or students who start their high school experience really focused on UT Austin, that there maybe is a feeling of inadequacy. I just don't know my passion. I don't have my thing. There's this popular phrase in some parts of college admissions: what's your hook? What's your passion? And I think what we've found is that every student has interests. All human beings have aptitudes. And so to force onto a student at ninth grade, 10th grade, or even in senior year that, hey, I have this one deep, abiding passion for biomedical engineering, it might happen with some students, but what's more likely is that they have a host of interests and experiences that lead them to consider that their major at UT might be one major or another.
Now, when you think about, how to guide a student through activities, we have to take into account developmentally where the student is, right? So, most students, as they start out in high school, are going to explore some of their interests, just things that they're innately interested in. And they're hopefully going to get involved in some of those. Again, that could be inside school, outside of school, doesn't matter a bit. As the student grows, goes up through high school, our hope is that as they increase, in grade, they're going to increase in initiative. And ultimately, the kind of cherry on top, if you will, is to actually make an impact. So if we go back to the conversation about service, the best service is where you can actually show how you made an impact and why. And if you really want to get good, why that is important to you, why that mattered to you. So I think that one of the things that's really important as the adults in the lives of students is that everyone gets worried about college admissions, right? And so then that turns into fear, and fear turns into anxiety, and then we kind of put it on our kids. And, we totally understand that. But they have to start at step one. Step one is just trying some things out. And so there's no way that most students are going to get to initiative and impact till they're at that point in their high school journey. So being comfortable with, and then some students are going to start having initiative here, but pick up an interest there. So this is circular. It's not a straight line. And I think that's really important to understand, because this is not step one, step two, step three. It evolves. It's organic. Bob, you want to
I
add
think,
anything?
yeah, I think one thing I would add is we always encourage students to be at the center of activity planning.
Mhm.
This isn't Google Maps. This isn't, hey, my next door neighbor got into nursing. I got a resume and I'm just checking off everything that's on her resume. I had worked with a family where the older son was a golfer and the younger daughter played field hockey. The son liked activities that were individual. He was motivated by beating other individuals, by excelling. The younger daughter was a team athlete. She loved working on projects that were team based. And so, really understanding that this begins and ends with the student. It's not singularly a process of how do I map myself to being dropped off at the dorm at UT Austin in freshman year of college.
What are some of the skills when we think about activity planning that we hope students will develop? Because one of the great things we believe about students being engaged overall is that there is a lot they learn from this outside of the classroom that are important skills that they take with them to college that ultimately help them thrive in college, which is, of course, all of our goal. Initiative, character, adaptability, collaboration, creativity, advocacy, listening, problem solving, resilience, all of these. And we could go on and on and on and on if you just think about things that your student is involved in and the skills that they develop. This is why it is important for kids to be engaged. And research bears this out, that kids feel better about themselves because they're developing skills. And one's not more important than the other necessarily, but helping, I think as parents, one of the great things we can do is help kids realize, like, actually when you're out there playing field hockey, you're also learning these other things, not just field hockey, that many of the activities that students participate in have tentacles of lots of skills that they're developing past just the name of that activity. So I think that's a really important point.
One other thing to add, as Lisa mentioned, UT Austin requires a lot of writing by a student. There's a lot of self-reflection that goes into UT Austin's applications. And trust us, that writing is read by an individual. And UT will ask a student, don't just tell us what you did, tell us who you were in doing that. And so a student, if she begins to be used to reflecting on herself, seeing and being able to articulate the skills that she developed, this is an important life skill. This is important to a student thriving in high school, and it is central to a student's application to UT Austin.
So ninth grade is the best year for a student to explore and get involved. Obviously, for some students, depending on, where most students, academics is a big shift from the 8th to the ninth grade. Things count, quote unquote, now. And so it's also a good time to build on their interests and their aptitudes for involvement. And depending on your student, to go outside their comfort zone. And if they have identified that they think they're going to be interested in one of these competitive majors, it's not a bad time to start exploring that a little bit. I don't mean, you need to go sign up for 8 camps or something like that, but gently to start considering exploring that is going to be important.
I was meeting earlier this week with a student who said that, she started taking things apart in her house in 4th grade. She knew she was a mechanical engineer by 7th grade. And so her activities in 9th grade really were about where could she apply that interest. Engineers often know that they're engineers in 9th grade. That's the exception. The rule is that a 9th grader is just getting oriented to high school, and they're just starting to try out some of their interest.
10th grade is that time when, of course, academics are still the most important, but where students may start to be finding more things to explore, to step up their engagement a little more. They're feeling comfortable in their environment. They may even have something where they want to take a small leadership role. And then where they probably want to start thinking after that sophomore year, how they might want to do something in the summer that would be key to their anticipated major. Summer, of course, is a great, great, great time to do activities that are going to relate to one's major. So that's usually that sophomore year. We're still not really talking about colleges at that point, but it is a good time to get a little more activity going.
Lisa, do you find for UT Austin that there's one activity that a student should do, or how should a family think about that summer planning?
Oh gosh, that's such a great question. No, there absolutely is not one. There's so many ways a student could go. Let's think about a student who maybe wants to study business because that's a popular major. Is they could get a summer job and learn how a business actually runs. They could take a class on marketing and finance. They could come to work, go to work with their parents if their parents work in business. They could start their own little business. There's a bazillion. When I could go on and on and on and on from just one major. You don't need to go spend a lot of money to get activities key to your major. You just need to show that you're actually genuinely interested in engaging here so that you ultimately can communicate what you got out of that.
One other question. UT offers a summer discovery camp that's hosted on UT's campus. Does this give a student an advantage in getting into UT Austin?
Wow, you're throwing me softballs today. No, it is not. They're just renting space on UT's campus, so it has nothing to do with UT. Just to set the record straight, no, some very few, I guess there's a few. 90% of summer programs have nothing to do with the student having any edge whatsoever in getting into college where they did the program. Now, if there is a summer discovery program that actually interests your student and it's the perfect program for them and it fits the perfect week you're in town and you've got the budget for it, there's also nothing wrong with doing that. So, but it isn't, summer programs are not a way in to college. And really, after the 10th grade, what we're wanting to do is let students kind of try something on. Even if they don't like it, that's a win, because then they know that that wasn't their thing. It also is a great thing to write about. And then they still have plenty of time to explore other possible majors, maybe shift some academics in school if things change. So, no, you're not going to get bonus points for the programs there. But I'm also wouldn't say that there couldn't be a program that could be good for a student through that. Sure. Okay, so 11th grade, now things are getting serious, right? That wonderful junior year, it's that most rigorous year of high school. A school like UT is going to want to see some AP or IB classes. It's also when students do their testing. This is when it is really helpful for a student to have either honed in on an anticipated major or majors. Sometimes we're still at 2 or 3 so that we can do activities that pick up a number of potential options. And then once the student makes a final decision, you can kind of tag things a certain way. But the hope is that the summer after junior year is building on prior activities. That would be the goal. One should especially think of that as your goal if you are going for those very competitive majors. At this point, you might consider internships. Internships could be in a family business, independent projects where you have a portfolio. If it's a more liberal arts major, it might be community service, activism. I think that families underestimate getting to this point, and then they realize, oh no, we don't have any fit to major activities. UT's gone back up on the list. And oh, wait, all the other colleges are asking this question too about major. So just in terms of families of younger students, exposing students to experiences that are going to help them explore majors. We can all agree that it's very young to have to do that. But sadly, that is where this process is. And what I will say, I think all 3 of us would agree that most of our students have good experiences in exploring these things. Like whether they ultimately end up doing that or not, they do get engaged, try something on, get new skills. But at this point, if a student is going for something like engineering, nursing, business, computer science, 11th grade isn't when you start it. 11th grade is when you're sort of putting the cherry on the top. And I think if I see one thing that kind of people are sort of rushing to the finish line, that can be it. And I think it is important to map out just a little loosely, how one might get there is important. And remember, you're including that both your coursework and your extracurricular activities. Anything you would add there, Bob?
Yeah, one thing I would add is that we do see a large number of 11th graders in the summer before their senior year doing an internship. We actually sometimes see students doing fee-based pre-college programs, but we have seen more and more students who want to be Longhorns really focus on hands-on experience, on getting experience with their major. And not just because of UT, but because they think college's #1 role is to prepare them for a career. And so they want to do something in that summer before senior year that really starts exciting them about that career and that major.
So how does one communicate all of this on their ultimate application? Hopefully many of you are far from that, but this kind of goes back to the little box that we did before. a student's going to have their essays, they're going to have their expanded resume, they're going to have their letters of recommendation, their transcript, and their test scores. Ultimately, this hopefully tells the story of student X, Johnny, let's call him Johnny. Okay, so this is the story of Johnny. And hopefully, obviously, Johnny has multiple parts, but also hopefully it is clear what Johnny has been preparing to study. That is important in this process. Now, your student may not fit that. And at that point, you have to ask yourself if is UT the right college for them. But if the goal, because that's why we're on this webinar, is how to prepare to be ready for UT, when this all comes together, it should hold together nicely, and it should show why the student is a good fit for that major and an overall great candidate for UT.
So we've mentioned a couple of times expanded resume. It really is probably one of the most distinctive parts of the application to UT Austin. At most schools, not all, but at most schools, a student will have 10 slots on their common application to communicate their activities during high school. Each of those slots has 150 characters, so students have to be really concise in the way they communicate their activities. If that's concise, UT wants expanded. They want an inventory, a list of every pertinent experience a student has that will help that admissions office really get a sense of who they are. We say to students over and over again, UT doesn't want to admit numbers. They don't want to admit GPAs or test scores. They want to admit human beings who can thrive at UT Austin. And a large part of that read is this expanded resume. It can sometimes be the second thing that's read after their transcript. And this expanded resume is a case for their fit to major. It might run 3, 4, heck, it could be 5 pages. And it's not just a resume that adults are used to in terms of title and date, activity. It's actually deeply the skills they developed, how much time they spent on this activity. It is a description of what high school has been for them, and it is read by a reader in their major to really assess, can this student thrive, not just at UT Austin, but in Cockrell or in Moody or at McCombs, a real sense of this resume making the case for fit to major. Lisa, you've seen so many of these UT expanded resumes. Are there any comments you can provide for families about the UT expanded resume?
I would say a few things. Number one, keep a log of your activities. We do this with our students. And so if you're working at home independently, keep some kind of log of what you're doing, because you're going to forget. And I think we notice that students forget a lot, which is understandable. It's over it actually goes from the summer before 9th grade. You can't include like citizen award in 2nd grade, I'm sorry, but you can include from before 9th grade onward. And I think when you're actually doing your application, we do a whole session on that, but showing the why you did it is really important. Remember that the reader doesn't have a ton of time. So readers in an admissions office are trained to read all these different applications and types, and they know what they're looking for by different types of majors, right? And so it is important to have the fit to major stuff at the very top. And I see that a mistake that a lot of people are making. No matter what, make sure, and you can name it whatever, it doesn't matter. Business experience, STEM experience, engineering experience, psychology, social sciences, whatever, but make sure that you've got that up at the top of that resume.
I want to make one other comment about an expanded resume, and that is, as a fellow parent, it is tempting to make this a graphic design exercise. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that. But all the fancy fonts and design choices in the world are secondary to the experience the student has had during high school and how that prepares her to thrive in the major she chooses.
And
Focus
I
on this, focus on the students, her skills, her experiences.
and they prefer they put on their website their kind of format, and that is how they like it. So I do see some people that are trying to get so beautiful, but it's not easy for the reader to then follow. So I would highly recommend following their guidelines. Okay, transcripts. Transcript is that wonderful record of all the classes you have taken in your grades. It's also going to show the rigor, and how is a school like UT going to look at this? They're going to look at the major and see if the students' classes align with it. They're going to look for rigor in the classes that are in the area of the major. They're certainly happy with rigor across the board, but they're definitely going to look at it there. Your high school will also send a profile. So if you don't have a lot of opportunities for fit to major classes because your school doesn't offer it, the college will know that because the profile will tell that. One thing that's really important to note is that UT does have a calculus readiness piece for a number of their majors. The easiest way to get this, and what we highly recommend, is taking calculus in the senior year. If you're an engineer, if you're business, if you're geosciences, or if you're environmental science, there are ways to get it from your test score, but we really have found, I think most people would assume that you needed calculus for all these majors except business, but business, it has become a pretty big part of any competitive business evaluation. So when a student is planning out their math, we do notice that high schools aren't always advising for this. And so we have had students that had to take pre-calculus in the summer in order to be able to get that calculus in. Another reason that we want to have these conversations now, so that you can plan if your student is not if they're aiming towards a major where their math trajectory is not going to align with that.
Lisa, a quick question. How many AP classes should a student take to get into UT Austin?
Well, there's obviously not a definite number. I think that's actually interesting. I would say UT is not the most like, oh, you've got to have, this many AP classes, but most students, remember that the pool of students getting into UT outside the top 6% is a rigorous pool of students, right? So most of them are going to have a significant number of AP or IB or honors, depending on what their school is, coursework. But there isn't a magic number. Some of the Southern schools have gone to kind of what feels like a magic number. Certainly there is a push right now for rigorous classes, especially in the area where the student is majoring.
And one other AP question. Should students always submit their AP test scores to UT Austin?
Oh, good question. You don't need to formally submit your AP. I mean, this is down in the weeds for when you actually apply, but you don't have to submit the scores except to the school that you attend. We only recommend showing scores that are 4s or above, because those are the ones that are going to really put you in the best light, and you have the option to report scores or not report scores. So we recommend our students report 4s and above.
Great. We thought it might be helpful to wrap up with a quick snapshot of what this year's results looked like for the incoming freshman class at UT Austin. The headline is that UT Austin is incredibly popular. It continues to become more and more competitive. As a frame of reference, last year overall, it was as hard to get into UT as it was to get into Cornell 20 years ago, which I know I had a mom I work with who said, wow, I have to adjust to that in my head because I still think UT when I got in. This school saw a record number of applicants, more than 66,000 applicants, and a record number of incoming freshmen. By law, 75% of the incoming class at UT Austin is auto admit. And as Lisa said, they're guaranteed a slot at College of Liberal Arts, but they're red for the impacted competitive majors. For non-auto admit kids, UT Austin had a 12% admit rate. That is on par with some Ivy League or Ivy adjacent schools. Now, the interesting thing about UT is that while being close to the top 6% is sure important for those non-auto admit kids, fit to major can really make a difference for kids who are not auto admit kids. As Lisa said, we work predominantly with non-auto admit students. So we've seen firsthand when we hear from students about their offers of admissions to UT, just how important, just how impactful an expanded resume and the essays related to fit to major can be. Also, as a reminder, students that are residents in the state of Texas receive cap options based on them not being offered admissions to UT Austin. You cannot apply to cap or PACE. Those are programs that UT utilizes in their process. One other thing to be aware of in terms of this growth to 66,000 applicants is that UT is test optional. So students who in the past would not have applied to UT because their test scores were out of range applied. Over the last couple of years, given the growth in the state of Texas, there's been an incredible growth in students applying to schools. And then UT Austin is the 10th most popular school among high school students in a survey last year. We've talked about impacted majors and the competition for these competitive majors. And so as a result, what we want to do is wrap up by sharing. Lisa, can you maybe give parents who are on this a little sense of how they can help?
Absolutely. I think that one of the things that's kind of underutilized, if you will, is that especially at the younger years, at like 9th grade and 10th grade, some of these things can be done as a family. Like, are there things that you can do as a family to start exploring some fit to major activities? Some students aren't going to be comfortable yet at that age going and doing an informational interview or whatever. Could you take your student to lunch with a friend who does something they might be interested in? So are there ways for the parent to help the student to engage? Also, I would say exposing your student to activities, having a value on exploration and curiosity in your family, encouraging reflection after your student does activities. If there's one thing families could do to help their students in this college process, it's encouraging some reflection. This is a very, very difficult skill for current teenagers. And so some of those things can really, really help. The other thing is that there's no rule that you can't work in a family business and actually learn skills. And oftentimes some of our best candidates have truly worked. So I don't mean you're saying they work. I mean, they are truly working because excuse me, because they are going to maybe be able to get more substantial experience, because you might be willing to let them do something that someone else might not do. So definitely don't underutilize friends and family in terms of these younger years. That really is how students are getting these experiences. And then as you go through the high school years, I think it's so critical to just understand that the college process has changed and that colleges, especially post-COVID, have become much less predictable and more competitive at the same time. And so make sure that your student has a strong list of colleges that include possible and match schools. So don't play, you want options at the end, right? And so as you are talking to your students about colleges right now, talk about a broad set of colleges. Don't box it in, because then it feels like a failure to the student when It's not a failure to the student. It's just the reality of the moment. And so, um, I think those are things that parents can really do to be helpful. I am surprised at how many students here in Austin never go tour UT. And I will say, it sounds like we're like a plug for UT. We don't have any relationship with UT, but they are typically very, very helpful also in the major. So students can often talk to someone in the majors. We've had students talk to people in the honors program. So definitely, if you live in Austin, utilize this resource right here in your back door, and don't wait until fall of senior year and students are rushing around going, oh, I don't know. And we're like, wait, you could talk to this person, you could talk to that person. When in reality, they could have done that anytime, because overall with this college process, as much as you can, you want to pace it out so that it's not stressful, because you don't want this to become a huge stressor in your family.
Today's webinar is the beginning of a series of webinars for families over the next several months. We've stressed deeply just how important summer activities are. It oftentimes, particularly as it relates to fit to major activities, is the largest time that students have to go deeper into a major. We'll be having a webinar in January, early January, to help families and students think about summer. In February, we'll have a webinar on college tours. And in March, we'll do a conversation around students that are applying to highly selective colleges. As I mentioned at the beginning, we'll be sharing a recording of this webinar and the materials, as well as our UT guide and a couple of other resources in the follow-up note. Don't hesitate to share with us any questions you have when you receive that. And we sure appreciate you taking a little time out of your Sunday afternoon to join us for this conversation on a topic that we love talking about. Have a great rest of the day, and we hope the rest of November is great for you.
Thank you.